You wake up before sunrise. The air is cold enough to sting your lungs. Around you, a small group of perhaps 30 people begins to stir. Someone feeds the fire, someone checks the children. Others prepare for another day of searching for food. There are no wedding rings, no dating apps, no written rules about love. Yet somehow, this small band of humans has to answer one of the most important questions any species can face. Who mates with whom? Your first instinct is probably simple. Ancient humans must have been completely promiscuous. Or perhaps they formed lifelong marriages exactly like many people do today. For centuries, scholars argued between those two extremes, but neither turns out to fit the evidence. Over the last 50 years, archaeologists, anthropologists, and evolutionary biologists have uncovered a far stranger picture. One where human relationships were flexible, strategic, and constantly changing with the environment. And understanding how ancient humans chose their partners may completely change how you think about modern relationships, jealousy, attraction, and even your own instincts. Because the way you love today did not begin with civilization. It began long before cities, farming, or even language as we know it. Around 7 million years ago, your ancestors looked nothing like modern humans. Species such as Sahelanthropus chagentensis, discovered in Chad in 2001, lived in landscapes very different from today's world. We know almost nothing about their social lives. Bones rarely preserve behavior. Instead, scientists look for indirect clues. One of the most useful clues is something surprisingly simple: body size. In mammals, differences between males and females often reveal how mating systems evolved. Take gorillas. Adult males can weigh nearly twice as much as females. That enormous size difference exists because one dominant silverback competes aggressively for access to multiple females. Only the strongest males reproduce regularly. Now compare that to gibbons. Male and female gibbons are nearly identical in size. They typically form long-term pair bonds and defend territories together. The same pattern appears across hundreds of mammal species. Biologists call this sexual dimorphism. The greater the difference between male and female body size, the more intense male competition usually becomes. Humans are unusual. Modern men are only about 15% larger than women on average. According to evolutionary anthropologist Peter Ellison at Harvard University, that places humans somewhere between highly competitive species like gorillas and strongly monogamous species like gibbons. Already, that creates a mystery. If ancient men constantly fought for huge harems, our bodies should look far more like gorillas. If humans evolved strict lifelong monogamy from the beginning, men and women should be even more similar than they are. Instead, our anatomy sits awkwardly in the middle, as if evolution never committed to either strategy. But body size is only the first clue. Another comes from something even stranger: our babies. In 1960, American anthropologist Sherwood Washburn proposed what later became known as the obstetrical dilemma. Human brains became dramatically larger during evolution. Adult brains average around 1,300 cubic centimeters, nearly 3 times larger than those of chimpanzees. At the same time, walking upright narrowed the pelvis. Those two changes collided. Babies could no longer stay inside the womb until they were fully developed. Instead, human infants are born astonishingly helpless. A newborn deer can stand within hours. A newborn chimpanzee clings tightly to its mother almost immediately. A human baby may require care for more than 15 years before becoming fully independent. No other great ape invests so much time into raising a single child. That changes everything. Because once offspring become this expensive, reproduction stops being only about mating. It becomes about cooperation. Evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers formalized this idea in 1972 through his theory of parental investment. The parent investing more resources into offspring becomes increasingly selective about mates. The parent investing less often competes more intensely. Human beings complicated this equation. Women invested pregnancy, then childbirth, then years of breastfeeding. But unlike most mammals, human fathers often invested too: food, protection, teaching, social alliances. The result was something evolution had rarely produced before: children who benefited enormously when both parents remained involved. But there was a problem. Nothing guaranteed that fathers would stay. Unlike pregnancy, fatherhood is far less obvious. Throughout evolutionary history, uncertainty shaped male behavior in powerful ways. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hardy has argued that humans evolved under constant tension between cooperation and reproductive uncertainty. Men benefited by investing in children who carried their genes. Women benefited from receiving support from reliable partners. Yet both also faced changing environments where flexibility could increase survival. Suddenly, mating was no longer simply about attraction. It became a negotiation between biology, risk, and opportunity. And that negotiation left traces inside your mind that still exist today. But here's where the story becomes even stranger. For most of human history, raising a child wasn't just the job of two parents. It often took an entire community. And that changes almost everything we think we know about ancient families. Around 1976, anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hardy began studying a question that many researchers had overlooked. Why are human mothers able to raise children that require more than a decade of constant care? The answer wasn't simply stronger mothers. It was more helpers. Hardy later described humans as one of the world's few cooperative breeding species. Unlike chimpanzees, where mothers do almost everything themselves, human children have often depended on fathers, grandparents, older siblings, aunts, uncles, and unrelated members of the group. Anthropologists call these helpers alloparents. Without them, early human survival may have been impossible. This idea wasn't based only on theory. It appeared repeatedly in living hunter-gatherer societies. Among the Hadza of northern Tanzania, researchers including anthropologist Frank Marlowe observed that children regularly receive food from adults who are not their parents. Among the Aka hunter-gatherers of the Central African Republic and the Republic of the Congo, fathers spend some of the highest recorded amounts of direct time holding infants of any known human society. Grandparents often contribute food long after their own children become adults. Older siblings carry younger ones for hours each day. A child could survive because dozens of people invested in that child's future. This changed the mathematics of reproduction. A woman did not necessarily need one perfect provider. She needed a reliable social network. A man did not simply compete with other men. He also built friendships, earned trust, shared food, and gained a reputation inside the group. Reputation became part of reproduction. Because in a band of only 25 to 50 people, everyone remembered who shared during hard winters. Everyone remembered who could be trusted. But cooperation did not eliminate competition. It simply made competition more complicated. In 1989, evolutionary psychologist David Buss launched one of the largest studies ever conducted on human mate preferences. His team surveyed more than 10,000 people across 37 cultures. Some results surprised almost no one. Others challenged decades of assumptions. Across nearly every population, women placed greater emphasis on traits linked to resources, stability, and commitment. Men, on average, placed greater emphasis on physical indicators associated with youth and fertility. These differences appeared from Nigeria to Japan, from Brazil to Sweden. Critics have debated the interpretation ever since. Culture clearly influences attraction. But Buss argued that consistent patterns across very different societies suggest an evolutionary foundation. Why would these preferences emerge? Imagine living 40,000 years ago. A partner capable of hunting, gathering, making tools, or maintaining alliances could dramatically increase a child's chance of surviving winter. Likewise, visible signs of health could signal successful reproduction. Natural selection never cared about romance. It cared about descendants. But there was another layer. Humans did not choose partners in isolation. Every relationship affected the entire group. Among many hunter-gatherer societies, marriages strengthened alliances between families. Food sharing expanded. Conflicts decreased. Knowledge spread between camps. Choosing a mate often meant choosing political allies long before politics existed. Except there was a problem. If everyone wanted the strongest hunter or the healthiest partner, competition should have produced extreme inequality. One man could monopolize dozens of women, like a dominant gorilla. But that rarely happened among mobile hunter-gatherers. Why? Because hunter-gatherer societies possessed something unusual. They were remarkably egalitarian. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm, in his influential 1999 book Hierarchy in the Forest, argued that early human groups actively resisted domination. No single hunter controlled all the food. No leader possessed permanent authority. Anyone becoming too aggressive risked ridicule, exclusion, or abandonment. Food itself worked against inequality. Large game spoiled quickly. A successful hunter could not eat an entire mammoth alone. Sharing became necessary. That sharing limited the ability of powerful individuals to accumulate lasting wealth. Without stored wealth, maintaining enormous harems became difficult. Mobility also mattered. Hunter-gatherers moved frequently. If conflicts escalated, families could simply leave. Social freedom acted as a powerful check on dominance. This may explain why human sexual dimorphism remained moderate rather than extreme. Competition certainly existed, but it unfolded within social rules that prevented most individuals from controlling everyone else. In many ways, ancient human mating resembled a balance between cooperation and competition rather than total victory for either. Yet this balance introduced another evolutionary challenge. How could anyone know whether a child was truly theirs? Unlike maternity, paternity could never be observed directly. That uncertainty influenced emotions that millions of people still experience today. Not because culture invented them, but because evolution found them useful. In 1972, Robert Trivers introduced another influential concept known as parent-offspring conflict. Parents and children do not always have perfectly aligned interests, but another conflict may have shaped adult relationships even more strongly. Mate guarding. Among many bird species, males remain close to fertile females during breeding seasons. Among mammals, dominant males often exclude rivals entirely. Humans developed far more subtle strategies: jealousy, attention, commitment, monitoring rivals. These behaviors vary enormously between individuals and cultures. Most remain completely healthy. Some become destructive, but evolutionary psychologists have argued that the underlying emotional systems may have developed because they reduced reproductive uncertainty over thousands of generations. This does not mean modern behavior is biologically predetermined. Culture, laws, morality, and personal choices profoundly shape human relationships. Evolution provides tendencies, not destiny. Still, it explains why certain emotions can feel surprisingly intense. Your brain is solving problems that existed long before cities existed, problems that shaped countless generations of ancestors. But even this explanation leaves one enormous mystery unanswered. Because when geneticists finally began sequencing ancient human DNA, they discovered that our ancestors were not following a single mating system at all. Different groups in different environments solved the same problem in remarkably different ways, and the evidence was hidden inside their genes. In 2010, geneticists led by Svante Pääbo published one of the most important discoveries in the history of human evolution: the first draft of the Neanderthal genome. For decades, Neanderthals had been imagined as a separate branch of humanity that disappeared without leaving descendants. The DNA told a different story. People living outside Africa today carry roughly 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. At some point between 50,000 and 60,000 years ago, modern humans and Neanderthals met, and some of them had children together. This discovery revealed something unexpected. Ancient humans were not following a rigid set of mating rules. Different populations mixed when circumstances allowed. Sometimes they remained separate. Sometimes they formed families. The boundaries between groups were more flexible than archaeologists had imagined. Then another surprise emerged. In 2018, researchers studying genomes from prehistoric Europe found evidence that some early farming communities practiced close-kin marriages, while others consistently avoided them. In Siberia, DNA from Denisova Cave revealed an extraordinary individual whose mother was Neanderthal and whose father was Denisovan. The parents belonged to two different human groups that had been evolving separately for hundreds of thousands of years. Yet they still produced a child. Human history was not a straight line. It was a web. People moved. Groups divided. They reunited. They exchanged knowledge, technology, and sometimes partners. The story of human mating was never universal. It changed with climate, geography, population size, and opportunity. But genetics uncovered another pattern that was even more revealing. In 2023, researchers analyzing thousands of ancient genomes across Eurasia noticed that mating patterns shifted dramatically after the invention of agriculture around 12,000 years ago. Before farming, most humans lived in highly mobile bands of 20 to 50 people. Food could not be stored for long. Land could not be owned. Power rarely accumulated in one place. After agriculture spread through regions such as the Fertile Crescent, everything changed. Fields had boundaries. Grain could be stored for years. Livestock became wealth. Wealth could be inherited. For the first time, choosing a mate was no longer only about health or cooperation. It increasingly became about property. Marriage slowly transformed into an economic institution. Families negotiated alliances. Inheritance determined status. Social classes emerged. Many traditions that seem ancient today are actually recent when viewed across the 300,000-year history of Homo sapiens. Civilizations introduced legal marriage. Religions formalized ceremonies. Governments recorded unions. But for roughly 95% of our species' existence, none of those institutions existed. Relationships were shaped instead by survival, reputation, kinship, and the needs of a small community. That realization forces historians to rethink a common assumption. There was never a single natural human relationship. There were many. Anthropologist Helen Fisher spent decades comparing cultures around the world. She identified recurring patterns of attraction, pair bonding, romantic love, and attachment. Yet she also found remarkable diversity in how societies organized families. Some cultures emphasized lifelong monogamy. Others accepted polygyny. A few practiced forms of polyandry. Some arranged marriages through extended families. Others allowed individuals to choose freely. Despite these differences, Nearly every society recognized stable bonds between adults who cooperated in raising children. That consistency hints at something fundamental. Humans evolved extraordinary flexibility. Unlike many animals, we do not rely on one fixed reproductive strategy. Instead, we adjust. Environmental pressures change. Social structures change. Technology changes. Human behavior changes with them. This flexibility may have been one of our greatest evolutionary advantages. When climates shifted during the Ice Age, humans adapted. When populations expanded into Australia roughly 65,000 years ago, they adapted. When they crossed into the Americas at least 15,000 years ago, they adapted again. The same species survived deserts, rainforests, mountains, tundra, and islands because it could reorganize nearly every aspect of social life, including mating. That adaptability became part of who we are. Today, your world looks nothing like that of your ancestors. You communicate across continents in seconds. You can meet thousands of potential partners without leaving your home. Modern cities contain more people than entire continents held during much of prehistory. Yet your brain was built in communities where everyone knew your name, where reputation spread by conversation rather than algorithms, where raising a child depended on relatives, friends, and neighbors standing only a few steps away. Some of the emotions you experience today: attraction, jealousy, trust, attachment, heartbreak, were shaped by selection pressures that unfolded across hundreds of thousands of years. But those emotions evolved for a world that no longer exists. That is why human relationships can feel so contradictory. You seek independence, yet crave belonging. You value freedom, yet fear abandonment. You desire novelty, yet long for stability. These are not opposing instincts. They are the legacy of an adaptable species that never committed to a single way of forming relationships. The question was never why ancient humans mated the way they did. The real question is why we expect there to have been only one answer. Because the most ancient thing about human love was never monogamy, promiscuity, or marriage. It was flexibility. And that same flexibility is still quietly shaping every human relationship today.